I'd like to officially welcome everyone to Should Successful Indie Authors Pursue an Agent with Dee Liebhart. This is a business clinic, which means Dee and I will be in conversation about this particular question and her experiences, but I think everyone's going to find this conversation quite informative, not least because Dee is willing to share figures, sales figures, expenses, and there's not always a lot of transparency around this. And I think it's really important that we know some of these figures because it informs next steps. So I'm really grateful to you, Dee, for being so open because it's going to help so many people attending and then those who watch the recording. Before we get started, I just want to give a shout out to Tertulia. Tertulia is a bookstore, and it is also an author website service. So they have recently launched in the last year a service for authors to easily build their websites. So they are sponsoring my newsletter this month, which gets them a mention in this free session. They are offering my audience 30% off their website service. So if you scan that code, you will get that 30% off. I think the retail price is somewhere around $100 a year. If you can't scan the code, that's okay. Just go to the YouTube recording and I'll paste the link in there so you can easily get the savings. Thank you to Tertulia. All right. I'm just going to give you a little bit about Dee because we're going to talk a lot about her situation as we go. But just to set the stage, Dee works full time as a nurse, but you are on the cusp of retirement. Isn't that right?
Yes, 108 days.
Yeah, not that you're counting.
No. Yeah.
And so some years ago, she started writing and publishing. She has currently 2 self-published novels, which I've got the covers here on the slide. Beautiful covers, I have to say. Are you willing to share who did your cover designs?
Yeah, and right now his name escapes me, but it's Go On Right. And it's
Go on,
right.
right.
Yeah, Go On Right, WRITE. And my advice to people on covers is to let the cover designer do what they do. So I just sent
Right.
him covers that I loved, and then he came back with these, and they're perfect.
Terrific. I think and knowing what you're writing, which for those who haven't checked out these novels, I would consider them works of women's fiction. Is that how you describe them?
Yeah, I do. I think they're a little bit more towards the contemporary side of
Hmm.
women's fiction, but yeah, very strong female leads, very female focused. So they're not, I don't know the right word, but they're not soft female fiction. They're more, yeah, just a little edgier.
Yeah, yeah. So the other thing I like about these covers is you've got this little kind of story kicker, or, how far would you go to keep a promise? And then on the other one, 3 ordinary mothers, 2 terrible secrets, 1 heart-stopping crisis that changes everything. I think that's also a really nice touch, something I don't often see, in fact. And I'm curious to know what inspired that. Why did you put that there? Did you hear that advice from someone?
No, I think the cover designer just asked me if I wanted to put a tagline on there. And the first one was not hard for House on Fire because that's very much, kind of a core thing with the book. But the one for Feral Creatures was a little harder to kind of come up with.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in any event, fabulous covers and being a successful author, regardless of how you publish, and in my mind, often starts with this. You need a strong cover for all of your other marketing and promotion to work. All right. So getting into your challenge. So you wrote me last year about the decision that you're facing. And I'm just going to read, this isn't the full thing that you wrote, but it's a lot of it. So you said, I'm questioning the viability, practicality, and frankly, the logic of pursuing a literary agent after achieving modest success as an independent author. I'm questioning whether trying to sign with an agent would be a wise move for my current and future projects. So, how does my track record as an indie author affect my chances or desirability in terms of getting an agent? Which career path is likely to be more financially sustainable in the long run? Which approach is most likely to expand my readership and reach? And if I do pursue an agent, how should my approach differ from that of a debut author? I'm seeking perspective on the long-term business implications of this decision. I love it when authors say that. Specifically, how to evaluate the trade-offs between creative control, financial outcomes, and market reach when moving between independent and traditional publishing paths. Most of the advice I've gotten from fellow writers seems inherently biased. Oh, yes, it does. Yes, it does. Indie suggests staying indie. Traditionally published writers think traditional is more legitimate. What I'm missing is an objective, business-minded view that really considers the overall ramifications. And I could not be more honored or delighted that you decided to ask me because, yes, I see all of the arguments and, frankly, tribalism around this decision. The communities can be very defensive about the choices that they've made. So I love that we can have this very open-minded and transparent conversation about this decision. For those who are familiar with me and my work, you probably know I do not place judgment on how people publish. I think every author is going to come down on this decision in a different way for unique reasons. And we just have to talk about the business implications and the goals. What is it that you're trying to achieve in order to come to some appropriate decision? And your decision might change over time. So I don't want anyone to feel, including you, Dee, that you're locked into one path over another. And obviously you know that, or otherwise you wouldn't be asking this question. All right. So I first just want to make sure we're all on the same page, especially for those who might be a little bit new to one side or the other, how I look at success in self-publishing in particular, like who is positioned to succeed. So when I look at the success stories, and Dee, I know you mentioned some of these to me when you initially wrote me, people like, the big outliers like Brandon Sanderson or Colleen Hoover, who are well known for self-publishing and also traditional publishing. The people who tend to do really well are in commercial fiction. Now, women's fiction is, I think it falls under that, but there's an important caveat we'll get to later. If you look at romance, romantasy, mystery, thriller, suspense, science fiction, fantasy, these are the areas where you see so much self-publishing activity. Authors tend to write series. They tend to do multiple books a year. I often see more than 3, 6. It's not uncommon to see beyond 10 or 12, especially when you get into the romance areas. And once you get outside the commercial fiction, like if you get into poetry or nonfiction, often these are the sorts of authors who reach their audience online. They might speak. They might be big on social media. They might have an established brand. So now this isn't an exhaustive list, but this is kind of the broad brushstrokes of who tends to profit. Now, Dee, when you wrote that first book, you told me that you initially went out to query. How did that go for you? Can you tell us a little bit about the process?
Yeah, so I queried, and I think this did have an impact. I was querying during 2020, so I was querying
Yeah.
during the pandemic, and I think what the topic of my first book is rather serious. I mean, the topics of all my books are rather serious, but it's about an ICU nurse whose mother asks her to euthanize her father.
Mm.
And so it was a very serious topic, and I got quite a few. I think I ended up getting 10 full reads, and I think ultimately I queried about 200. I
Wow.
basically, I
Yeah.
think I queried everybody is
Yeah.
what I did.
Yeah.
And what happened, which was this kind of an infuriating thing where people would say like, "Oh, I really like it," but they never offered
Yeah.
representation.
Yeah.
And so I was getting, I was getting like the encouragement of, yes, this is, worth doing. And at the same time, not getting, the actual agent. So
Yeah.
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 So it didn't go, it was painful. That's what I will say.
Yeah. Yeah. And as I'm sure you know, your situation is so common, especially
Mhm.
during that time period, although it's still common now, of course.
Mhm.
Okay. I forgot to mention the guy I have on the slide here, AP Beswick. I used him as an example because he ramped up so quickly as an author, successful author, and it's mainly through his presence on TikTok. I'm not going to say he succeeds because of TikTok, but he's just figured out how to reach his people there. So this is just to mention that successful self-publishing authors have figured out something that works for them to reach their readers, and then they repeat it. They repeat it, and they repeat it, and they repeat it. I see them do it on YouTube. I see them do it on Instagram. I see them do it on Royal Road or Wattpad. which just goes to show there's not like a one way to do this. People figure out what works for them, and then they try to repeat it for as long as it works. All right. So I find that self-publishing is more challenging for children's authors, which I mentioned a little bit earlier before we officially started, especially if you're in the picture book or middle grade space, because it's really hard to directly reach your readers. Most people are not marketing directly to children, thankfully. So what you have to do instead is market to the educators, the parents, the librarians, the gatekeepers of children, the people who recommend books to children. And that is just really hard to do as a self-published author. But if you were going to try, I think Darcy Pattison is really the model to follow. Now, I have to say, she did have a traditional publishing track record before she started self-publishing. So she's one of these hybrid authors who does both. But she has a Substack and she has books that really outline what it takes. And if you're in that position, I cannot recommend her more. And I apologize for the typo on the slide. I was so excited about Darcy Pattison, I made a typo. So check out her Substack, Indie Kids Books, and take a look at her books if you're in the children's space. Because today's session is really going to focus on adult work, although there are a lot of the same principles apply, of course. Then literary authors, or people who seek that traditional industry recognition, like you want people like the New York Times or Publishers Weekly or whomever to pay attention to you. Really hard to do that without a publisher standing behind you. So if you're literary, you probably know it. These are the people who come out of the MFA programs. It tends to be the people who write the poetry or the essays. You're trying to write literature with a capital L. It's art. Often people who are not that interested, in fact, in marketing and promotion, although that's a bad stereotype. Okay, the third bullet point is most relevant to you, Dee. Memoirists, women's fiction authors, and upmarket fiction writers. Hybrid publishing tends to be a popular option here because self-publishing is so challenging. And a lot of folks in these categories, it is so competitive and it is so challenging to get a traditional book deal that they just end up with a hybrid. Some of them do self-publish, the more entrepreneurial ones. Now, why is this more challenging? There are a range of reasons, but I think, Dee, you know what some of them are. It's because you're often writing standalones. Mm-hmm. And it's so much easier when you're self-publishing to be successful with the series. It just opens up a lot more marketing and promotion strategies. And I find that people writing in these categories, they're not typically the prolific types. They're not doing the 4, 6, 10 titles a year, which, one of the reasons self-publishing authors can do well and earn a living is volume. They have more IP. They have what's called more SKUs. They have more product to sell. They have more ways to combine it and package it and mix it up and partner with other people. And make things free in the hopes that it will sell the other stuff. That's really hard when you're only doing like a book a year, and especially if you're early in your career. Although I wouldn't say you're necessarily early, Dee, but 2 books isn't a lot to work with when you're self-publishing. And then, there on the slide, the people who only produce a title every year. And I think, Dee, you mentioned to me, you have a specific goal in mind for how many books you're going to have out over the next few years. You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, my goal, if I stay indie, like if I don't try to pursue an agent, is to have 5 books out by the time I'm 60, which is 3 more years.
Yeah. So that's a nice pace in my mind for a traditionally published author. So that's like the qualities that I see in your work align with the traditional publishing model. That doesn't mean you should traditionally publish, but that's what I see on the surface. Okay. Bruce is asking for some definitions of indie and traditional because they vary from person to person. So for clarity, I just want to say that for the purposes of this class, I am defining indie author as someone who self-publishes. They are not working with a traditional publisher, so they are responsible for everything. So you might hire someone to do your cover, you might hire someone to help you, but you take care of the expense. You have to decide who to hire. You're responsible for the consequences of whatever you do. If you're a traditionally published author, then you have a publisher who is taking care of all of the expenses. And of course, they also have a lot of control over what happens, like the cover design or the pricing and the packaging, where it gets distributed. So obviously, authors want to collaborate with their publisher and have some influence, but it's because it's the publisher that's the one who's paying, they often get the final say unless you're a Stephen King type. So I hope those definitions provide some clarity for you, Bruce. When I talk about hybrid authors, this is where we get really confusing. Hybrid author is someone who does both, and increasingly I see that's the case where people are switching off depending on the needs of the project. Or you find that self-publishing authors will sell off their print rights to a traditional publisher and keep doing their digital on their own. We're going to talk about that actually right now. So it gives me a really good opportunity to talk about what I would call like the false dilemma or the false choice that often comes up with this topic, which is I don't think you have to choose anymore. So, Dee, I would say that, whatever happens with your next project, whether you decide to look for an agent or not, I do think it's possible to continue self-publishing and to seek an agent and traditionally publish some things. Obviously, so much depends on the publisher you might be working with and what they're looking for. Every publisher is different in how flexible they are, but increasingly over time, to the benefit of all authors, they're allowing you to do whatever you need to do in order to increase your readership. So, which means allowing you to publish things as long as they don't think it's going to compete against what you're doing with them. So again, I just want to mention there are so many examples of this in the market right now. We could talk about them all day long. If I just looked at the New York Times bestseller list yesterday and I pulled out these 4 titles, 2 of them are from Frida McFadden. No surprise. She's like the biggest selling author right now in the mystery, thriller, suspense area. She works with source books in the United States, and her books are self-published by her in digital format, and then Sourcebooks takes care of the print distribution. So she gets to play both sides. How nice. And I find that is increasingly the case for people in the commercial fiction space. Some of you may have heard of the Theo of Golden book that was initially self-published and it became so successful. And this is on the more like upmarket side, so it's a little unusual and I think promising for anyone that's on the upmarket side. He struck a deal with a traditional publisher, and I don't know what the terms of that deal was, but my impression was he just handed it over all rights. I could be wrong about that though. I haven't researched it. And then finally on the far right, we have Matt Dinneman, who does what's known as lit RPG. This is like the role-playing game fiction. And this is another situation where he's had outstanding success in an area that was ignored by traditional publishing. And so he signed a deal where they do the print and then he maintains his digital rights, which means he's doing the ebook and the audiobooks. And I assume he's probably preserved other rights like TV, movie, and so on. All right. So before I move on from here, does this raise any questions for you, Dee? Anything you want to ask?
Yeah, how do you do that?
How do you do that?
So
Wild success.
yeah,
Yeah.
I actually like Frida McFadden. I don't read those kind of books and I don't write those kind of books, but I just heard her on something, and I honestly I wanted to not like her, and she is such a nice person.
Yeah.
And her background is actually more encouraging than anything, I think, for somebody who's indie. So
Yeah.
yeah.
She's a doctor too, right?
Yeah. And she only just kind of got found out. For the longest time.
Yeah.
Her 2 worlds were very separate. I mean, they knew she was a physician, but her people that she worked with didn't know that she was a writer. And then someone outed her, and it was kind of they're like, "Is this you?" And she was like, "Yeah, it's me." Yeah.
I'm so glad you said that, because just yesterday I was using her as an example of someone with a pen name, and I was pondering during that class, I don't know how she can keep it a secret for much longer. Like when your photo gets published in the New York Times,
Yeah.
how do you maintain that separation? Okay. So moving on, you asked the right question, Dee, which is how do I do that? So, I mean, partly this is asking what track record do you need to secure an agent who will facilitate these sorts of deals for you? And I want to say there are more agents than ever who facilitate these deals and proactively seek out the authors that they think they can sell in some sort of a rights deal or sell all rights. So neither is better. It's just about what you want. Some people are like, I'm ready to be done with self-publishing. I just want to hand it over to someone else. And other authors just want to remain intimately involved and still steer the ship and have all the control. No right or wrong answer. I have to emphasize that again and again. Okay, so there are three kind of answers here because the deals are different. So if you're just going to do a rights sale, like a Frida McFadden, I'm going to sell my rights to the print rights to the publisher. I'm going to keep my digital rights. You got to have strong sales that are hopefully increasing over time. More often these days, a successful series, or you need to show that you're prolific. I mean, how often does Frida McFadden come out with a new book? It feels like it's practically every month. There's always a new one coming. You need strong reviews and ratings. We're going to look at that soon for you, Dee. And then a clear opportunity to expand the market. So for a lot of self-published authors like you, it's clear to the agent or publisher that you are really hitting the Amazon market well. You're getting the readers in that area, but outside of that market, you're kind of invisible. And so they see the opportunity to take you to a bigger readership. Now, if you are pitching the agent for new work in the same genre or category, so this means you've done well with your self-published work, but maybe you haven't done quite well enough to have that rights sale. Then maybe you pitch your next book as, I've had this success, I've built a good foundation. Would you take my next book? That's the same. And so again, you need that strong sales, but it's probably not going to be as good as the rights sales. Probably what we would call a platform for the category, like you're building recognition for that, for producing a certain type of work. They're going to want to see demonstrated engagement with readers so that you're going to be able to go back to them and market and promote, hey, I've got a new book out. And then again, the strong reviews and ratings. If you're pitching an entirely different book, so you've built this track record in women's fiction and now you want to pitch them something else, it's not likely going to matter to them what you've done self-publishing wise unless there is some kind of clear reader crossover where they see you're going to be able to take advantage of that and sell to that audience in the new space. So like an example, like a really stark example would be you have built a really successful track record writing children's picture books, and now you want to do erotica. So it's like, yeah, there's not going to be any reader crossover there. At least I hope not. For you, Dee, I want to talk a little bit first before we grapple with that. I want to talk a little bit about the success that you've had because it is meaningful. So the two novels, if we look at them on Amazon, that's where agents and publishers turn first. FYI, it's not because, we all want to defend and promote Amazon, but this is where we go because that's where consumers go. So we look at House on Fire and we see 1,800 customer reviews with a 4.3 average star rating, 4.1 on Goodreads. For those who don't know, Goodreads ratings are always a little bit lower than the Amazon because the people on Goodreads are a little bit more mean. For Feral Creatures of Suburbia, this came out a little bit later. We've got an even higher rating, which is really nice. It has fewer reviews, but that's because it came out later. So the first book came out in 2023, and this one Feral came out in 2024. And so, Dee, you've been very generous with sharing the information about your sales. 10,000 copies sold on House on Fire with 1.7 million page reads. For those who don't know what that is, it means that's how many people have read the book in Kindle Unlimited on a page-by-page basis, and you earn money from that. And then for Feral, that's 2,500 copies sold and 1 million page reads. So this looks really strong. Now, someone asked as soon as we started the class, how successful is successful? Is it 100 books sold, 1,000? What's the number? And I want to say there isn't really a magic number because there's so many variables. Like, what are you selling it for? Like, what's the price point? What genre are we talking about? How long has the book been out? So there are all of these different variables. But from my perspective, this is a really strong showing. And I think any agent or publisher would look at this and say, boy, you're really well positioned to do even better if you were able to accomplish this by yourself in the women's fiction category, which I think is inherently challenging in today's market for all sorts of reasons. Okay, so I'm going to pause there. Is there anything oh, well, actually, I think you should explain to people who are here because I know they want to hear it. How did you get that many reviews?
So the reviews I did primarily, I did NetGalley. And so I did 3 months. I wouldn't necessarily recommend 3 months, but that's what I did for both books. The books were up on NetGalley. If you don't know what NetGalley it is, I did a co-op. So it cost about $50 a month for the book to be up there. And then readers participate, they download the book for free, and then they leave a review. So that was the first thing that I did. I also did some Goodreads giveaways. So for each book I did, I think House on Fire was 3, and I think Feral Creatures I did 4 Goodreads giveaways. Those cost about, I think it's like $120 each, $119 each. And what Goodreads does is they basically promote the giveaway, and then I did whatever the maximum number of giveaways was. I don't remember
Yeah.
what that was. And so you give them the digital book, they win the digital book, and then you hope that they're gonna, go leave reviews. And those
Right.
those all happened before the book came out.
Yeah.
And then after the book came out, I did what's called a promo stack.
Hmm.
And so a promo stack is when, because both books are in Kindle Unlimited, I am not wide. Wide is when you are not exclusive to Kindle. And I chose to go exclusive to Kindle. So what you can do when every 90 days on Kindle Unlimited, you can make your book free. And so a promo stack, you make your book free for 5 days, and then you actually pay. Your book is free, and you pay somebody to tell everybody that it's free, because otherwise no one will notice. So I did a promo stack, and that is actually those 3 things were how I got over. I didn't want to start advertising until I was well over like 100 reviews, because I think that I know I wouldn't buy a book if I looked at it and it had less than 100
Yeah.
reviews. I felt like 100 was a good round number that made me feel like, okay, this looks more legitimate than, my friends reviewed it.
Right.
Um, so I felt like that was, I don't have 100 friends. Um, so yeah, and I think that it just seemed like a legitimate number for me. There was no
Yeah.
real reason for that.
Yeah.
Um, so out of those 2 things, I definitely think NetGalley was worth it. I think the other thing with NetGalley is if your book, and I hate to put it this way, but I'm just going to be as blunt as possible. If your book isn't good enough, you will find out on NetGalley.
Yes, you will.
You will very quickly get people like, I couldn't get through this. This is terrible. This is awful. They're not nice. But if they like your book, they're very nice. And so I think that's a really good thing to do. It's also kind of a low risk thing because the book is not yet out in the world. And so you can pull back. You can be like, okay, I'm not ready. I need to, do extra things.
Yeah.
The Goodreads giveaways, I'm going to be honest, there was no way to judge. There was
Hmm.
really no way to judge who of those people left reviews.
Hmm.
So I don't know if they were worthwhile or not. And then the promo stacks were definitely, absolutely worth it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just want to say that you followed kind of the best practices playbook for all of this. So for those who are listening, Dee did her homework. She looked at what's recommended by the experts. She waited until she had a good number of reviews to start advertising. Like it's just all by the book, which is not to say it's boring. It's just like to show it worked. It actually worked, but it does require having a good book. And I'm so glad that you pointed that out. Okay. So moving on, here's the big wrinkle for me about what your next step is for the next book, because you told me that your next project is not a work of women's fiction. It's a memoir. So tell us more about this.
Right. Well, I'm not, God, how I wish I were somebody who could write to market or write what's popular or write series. And I'm just not. That's not how I write. It's not who I am. And so, yeah, I've been working on a memoir, and that is my next book. So my next book is a memoir, and that was the book that I had started thinking about pursuing an agent for.
Yeah.
Now, I will say the one thing is that it definitely, both of my books actually have an element of end of life, because I'm a nurse,
Yeah.
and it's something that we deal with, and it's something I've dealt with in my family. So both books have an aspect of healthcare and end of life and things like that. And that is what my memoir is about. Like, I took care of my mother for the end of her life, and not only there's a very direct connection with House on Fire. So House on Fire is a very personal story. My dad had dementia, and my mom was his caregiver and would frequently say, and it's exactly the line that's in the book. She said, if he knew this was going to happen to him, he would have gone out in the backyard and blown his brains out. And that phrase literally is quoted directly in the book. And basically it's played out, is like, how would you actually help somebody die, right? So how would you actually do this if you thought that that was what they wanted? And so unfortunately in 2020, it was no accident that my mother asked me to help her die. My mom had a stroke that started out as something very small that became huge. And she asked me to help her end her life. And the memoir is my experience of going through that. One, having written the book, so going through it as the writer who knew exactly how to do what she was asking me to do, not because I was a nurse, but because I'd spent, tons of time researching it. And then also going through it as a nurse who I have experience with death. I have experience with these things. And so it was just a very, like, very personal thing that was directly related to what I write about. So that, I guess, is why I think that it's, for me, I'm a very eclectic reader. And so I'm not, I don't pick books like that. Someone tells me, oh, this is interesting, and I go and read it. And so I see them as very connected, but I realize that, that's not necessarily how other people will see them. And then I know you're going to tell me I'm wrong on this, and that's, I already know that. But like, one of my thoughts was that's why I would pursue an agent, is because it's
Mhm.
different, and
Yeah.
I need different help. I need someone
Right.
else who's going to help with that. Does that
Sure.
I guess does that make sense?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It
Yeah.
makes perfect sense. Um, I think the challenge for you, and this brings me to my next slide, is that if you look at what is the most difficult thing to sell in the nonfiction space, it's memoir.
Yeah.
So this chart actually was not done by me, although I've annotated it. So that middle part that shows the 1 through 9, that's from a big New York editor called Sean Delone, and he puts the hardest thing to sell as memoir non-celebrity, which describes most of us, including me, and then the easiest thing to sell as a celebrity memoir, like Prince Harry.
Mhm.
And then you've got everything else in between. So, you know, I would not discourage you from looking for an agent for the memoir, because I think, especially if you to break out with it, I would certainly love to see you have a publisher help do that. What's most likely, and again, there's so many variables. I haven't read your memoir. I don't know if it would work in the current market. I think the most likely thing is a small publisher or a university press would take it on, and you wouldn't need an agent for that.
Mhm.
So if I were just trying to save your time and give you the most likely path forward for the memoir on its own, I would say research the heck out of the small press and university press market, where they are more accepting of memoirs. You can find many memoir deals in Publishers Marketplace, for example. If it's not a celebrity, you're going to find the sorts of presses that take them on. So that's what I would encourage you to do. I just don't think unfortunately, I don't think the women's fiction success will have any bearing on an agent's likelihood of taking on the memoir, because they just don't take on hardly any memoir at this point.
Memoirs. So then I guess my question, if you're suggesting that, would be, then why wouldn't I just do it myself? Because I can do this.
Oh, you absolutely could.
Yeah, yeah.
You absolutely
So
could.
so what would because I think the reason. that I have thought about this, and I think the one thing that I continue to feel, which rightly or wrongly, because I do think there's a level of that I didn't intend to go down this path. I didn't
Mhm.
intend to be an indie. And so there's always like in the back of my mind that nagging thought of like, you weren't good enough, you weren't good enough. That's why you don't have a traditional deal. And I think that with a small publisher, then it's not giving me the thing that I'm actually looking for, I guess, with traditional publishing. I'm looking for someone to get me that bigger reach.
Mhm.
And I feel like a smaller publisher, I guess depending on who it is, um,
Yes.
it may not get me what the thing that I feel like I'm missing.
Yeah. So depending on who the publisher is carrying a lot of weight in that sentence.
Mhm.
And so let's keep talking. The way I planned our conversation is that we would talk about should you pursue an agent for your next work of women's fiction, but I think the
Okay.
same considerations apply to the memoir as well. And thinking through, would you really benefit from having a publisher or agent involved? Now, I don't know that an agent is very likely to help you out here, so I think I would go direct to publisher. It's the same considerations, though. It's just that
Mhm.
you need an agent in order to knock on the door of a big five or some other really prestigious houses. So the question with, the variables here, there's the issue of creative control. There's the issue of financial desirability and sustainability. And then there's the readership growth and the market reach, which are slightly different things. We'll talk about that. And I think it's a really important consideration when making this decision. So, for better or worse, the creative control piece is so variable. Who knows what will happen? It's going to depend on the publisher. Sometimes it doesn't really matter because you're just in sync with the editor or the publisher about how it needs to be done, and there's no disagreement, and, it's rainbows and unicorns. Now, that isn't typically how it goes, but it actually I think it bodes well for you that when you hired a designer and you were like, I just let him do what he does, like he produced the right thing. That to me says you work well with people who know what they're doing, and you're not going to insert yourself in areas where maybe you don't have as much professional expertise. I only say that because I see so many authors butt heads with their publisher on things where they're really asking for uh, unreasonable creative decisions, like please have my daughter design the cover,
Mm.
or other things
I
that,
definitely don't want that. Yeah.
or they're asking for things that go against what the market typically would expect from the sort of book that you're doing. Now, granted, publishers are not big risk takers. Like they like to do things that they know work, and some authors want to try and break out of the mold. If you're the break out of the mold sort of person, you may find that this issue causes you a lot of frustration. So part of this is self-awareness, like knowing how you collaborate. Ask yourself, have I had productive collaborations in the past? Are you difficult to work with? Now, I think the best defense here is you should only sign with a publisher that you're actually excited to partner with. That's why I said, depending on the publisher, that holds so much weight. And for my book, I just want to use myself as an example for a second. I was so excited to work with the University of Chicago Press on my book. I have so much respect for them. It is the exactly right home for my book, the other authors that they publish. I want to be in the same community. I want the status and the prestige associated with being with this publisher. But I have to tell you, I hated the cover design that they did for the first edition. And we just went round and round with that. But it was worth it. It was worth it to me in the end because I still love being with University of Chicago Press, and because we have so much respect for each other, we were able to move forward despite disagreements. And there have been other areas that I might not be 100% happy with, but again, it's worth it because I want to be with them. So this is why, in my opinion, you should never sign with a publisher that you're feeling like, well, it's better than having no publisher. That is not true. It is not true. Okay. So moving on, I want to talk about the money. And I know some people are already very anxious to know with all of those sales, how much money were you earning? And I think it might surprise people to know that you actually lost money. So
Mm.
part of this is because you spent a lot of money up front, even while you were still in that traditional publishing process, like thought you were going in that direction. You spent money on editing. And then you also spent quite a bit of money on audiobook production. You had advertising costs because you heavily advertised. And then the book sales, while really meaningful, just haven't yet risen to the level to cover all of those expenses. I think you eventually will get there,
Mhm.
but you just had really significant outlays at the very beginning, and it's hard to recoup that. Is there any detail you want to add, any context for this?
Yeah, and because I do want to talk about the specifically the audiobooks and maybe also a little bit about the developmental
Hmm.
editing. So the
Yeah.
first developmental edit was for House on Fire, and that was before I even thought about going indie. So I had gone to a handful of agents, and I have to say, I got one agent, and now I can't remember her name, but she was lovely, and they gave me positive feedback, and then I said, could you tell me more? And they literally sent me a 2-page letter of feedback, and I was like, okay, this is something I need to address. And so that was why I did the developmental edit. So the developmental edit costs you can say don't count,
Hmm.
um, but I think that most writers are doing that now to get a traditional deal as well. So
Yeah.
I don't necessarily think that that's I count them as I spent that money. So
Right.
but I think that people are doing that anyway. The other thing is I also went with two very very high end editors for both books, so they were pretty expensive in terms of how much I spent for my developmental edits. And
Yeah.
I don't think that everybody would necessarily spend that amount of money. The other thing is the audiobook. So this was a very deliberate decision on my part. I wanted to, one, own the rights myself. I don't like sharing things. I like control.
Yeah.
If I'm gonna be in charge, I'm gonna be in charge. And so I made the decision to go ahead and pay outright for the audiobooks, and that was huge. I think House on Fire was about $3,000, and Feral Creatures, because it's got 4 different narrators and is a longer book, was somewhere in the 4,000 plus range. And I did those very specifically because I know that I'm retiring, and I knew I was going to be retiring, and I knew I wouldn't have the money to do them later.
Yeah.
And I am a huge audiobook person. And so I definitely wanted to have them. Now, if I was to do something differently, I would not do the audiobooks again this way. I would consider a profit share. You can do a profit share with a narrator where they narrate the book basically for free and then you profit share. So that's one option. I hate that these words are coming out of my mouth, but I might actually consider like AI
Mhm.
because it just makes it a lot more affordable. And then I have considered narrating them myself. I actually think that's the lowest option that I would probably do. Um, but that's another thing that you can do. You can learn how to narrate yourself and do a good quality product. But it was really important to me that they were good quality and that I had them before I went into a time when I'm not going to have as much income.
Yeah.
But that would have brought down, my negatives, a lot.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
So for those listening, and maybe for you too, Dee, I just want to point out that so many self-published authors don't do the audiobook because of the costs, and usually the sales don't meet the threshold you would expect to recover the costs. And that's why so many self-published authors, for years, they wouldn't do the audiobook unless they were approached by someone who specializes in doing that. Like Podium Audio is the example that they sign a lot of self-published authors to do the audiobook edition. And because they do so many audiobooks, they have particular terms with Amazon or Audible and other places that just make it easier, let's say, to earn a profit than if you're an author getting into those situations. And then the other thing that I've noticed a lot in the last couple of years, self-published authors using AI narration in order to bring down the cost and, you know, increasing their audience, frankly, because their readers are okay with that. Now, that's again, that's everyone's going to make a different decision on that, but I think we're going to see only more and more authors use AI narration. And then that doesn't mean you can't do a human narrated book later on. In fact, some people predict we're going to see a bifurcated market where people pay more for the human narration and they pay less for the AI narration. We shall see. I don't know what will happen there. Mary's asking if the book sales include profits from audio, and I believe that it does. Is that right?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, yeah.
Yeah.
But they are nowhere near. I mean, the sales of the audio, and that surprised me because, like I said, I consume audiobooks like, a lot.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I was just shocked that it wasn't that they just don't sell as well. It's just not as much. I think people do prefer books and Kindle.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think also you see with audio, you tend to see higher uptake in things like science fiction and fantasy and some other genres where year after year, the services themselves, whether it's Audible or Spotify, say our best-selling genre is mystery, thriller, suspense, or fantasy, and they just stick there at the top no matter what happens. Okay, so I mentioned this earlier, but I think it just deserves to be stated again that you've done so much hard work and learning to get to this point. I obviously observe a lot of authors go through this. I have for many, many years now, and you've managed your own marketing and publicity campaigns. You facilitated those giveaways. You did the promo stack. You learned how to do the advertising. You waited to advertise until you had the reviews. And you also have a newsletter that's growing. You've got a reader magnet. So it's, your success. And I do, even though you've got the red, you're in the red currently, I still think you have been so successful. I still would ask, though, that's the purpose of this class, would you come out ahead with a publisher? And so much obviously will depend on what the publisher offers you. What does the deal look like? So I would really encourage you, whether it's for the memoir or for the next novel, to run the P&L yourself. And I imagine you would do this whether or not I told you to, because you seem like that sort of person. So now, in my mind, you're not going to have any editing or production expenses, but you made the excellent point that these days there are many traditional authors who will hire their own editor, or they have some people that they work with outside of the editor inside the house. But I want to emphasize that this varies so much. I can't tell you what's typical. And I think it's also a very personal decision. So my assumption is that you would go in with no editing or production expenses, but you might say, no, I'm going to budget in something for that. I don't know that advertising would be a sensible expense if you're traditionally published, because it's so hard on a copy per copy basis to make enough to cover the expense when you're not self-publishing. Now, I do know some authors will do it anyway, just for the visibility, but I would feel a little queasy myself doing it. So something to think about is, would the advance be the only money you see? And it depends on how big the advance is. If it's a low advance, I think you'd earn it out very quickly. If it's a high advance, like let's say it gets into the six figures, well, then you have to start asking some questions about, would I really be able to earn that much on my own? So what I would do is, whatever the advance is, you have to then look at the royalty rate that they're paying you. Here I have some example royalty rates on the slide. Again, this may not be what's in the contract. It varies by publisher, but run the numbers, and I would estimate your sales by averaging what your last two books sold at whatever point in time you're at. This could be a year from now, who knows? And then run those numbers and see what happens. You'll notice that the ebook royalty is very different. It's based on net. If you are working with one of the big five publishers, they get 75% of the ebook price. If you're working with a publisher who's not big five, like if you're working with Chicago, like I am, that's probably not what they're getting. They're probably getting something that's more like 50 to 60%. So you'll have to also figure that out. You'll have to ask the publisher. They should be able to tell you. They want you to be able to make an informed decision. Do you have any questions about those royalty rates or making that calculation?
No, it's a lot of, it's math though. The the one thing I guess is like that magic number,
Mhm.
like where are you, where are you like, oh yes, you should definitely take that. Like if someone was offering, like, do you have in your head that like if someone told you they were going to pay you this, you should do it? I mean, definitely six figures obviously is a yes,
Yes.
but like
Yeah.
I'm assuming that yes is a little much further down.
I mean, if you've got a publisher that you feel like, yeah, they're okay, and they offer you less than 10, I would be like, I, I, I don't know. I mean, they would have to be offering something else that I wanted, which I'm going to talk about next. I wouldn't do it on a financial basis, but there are other reasons to do it that aren't just based on the money in your pocket. Once you get above 20,000, that's when I think you're starting to think it's worth like giving it a shot and seeing what
Hmm.
happens. So, but again, for those listening, I want to tell you this is not an ironclad rule. Please do not use that in your next negotiation. It's going to depend on your history and the book and so many other factors. But for you specifically, Dee, I would say I think the decision would be really hard. I would struggle with it if it were somewhere in this like 10 to 20,000 range. It's kind of
Hmm.
it's to me would be a no man's land kind of offer for your next novel. With a
Hmm.
memoir, I would take it.
Okay.
I would take it.
Yeah.
I also forgot to mention, you probably know this, but there will be no KU earnings with the traditional publisher
Hmm.
because they don't put their books in that system.
Yeah.
But I think you would make it up in other ways, which we're going to talk about. So the other consideration, and this is really important, is you're going to get some market reach with a traditional publisher, assuming they're a decent one. And by decent, I mean they have distribution, like they're able to get books into stores. They have a sales team. And you should be able to figure this out pretty easily if you just do your research. But most of the work that traditional publishers do is hidden from public view. It's hidden from authors. They've got these sales teams or sales reps. They have marketing plans that get developed. The orders come in and then the book releases. And that's where, the public starts to see what the publisher has done, but they don't see everything that led up until that moment. So they are going to invest in the advanced review copies. They're going to go through that NetGalley process that you went through, the Goodreads thing. They're going to have advertising to bookstores and libraries. They're going to try and hit the people who make decisions about what books get displayed and promoted. They're going to try, if they're really supporting you, to get Barnes and Noble on board and make you a selection. So they appeal to all of those industry folks who have some power. And they're going to do whatever they can to move the needle with the industry people. Then you've got the foreign rights sales that might happen to TV and movie rights, which are really difficult to accomplish when you don't have either an agent or a publisher in the mix going to the rights fairs, the book fairs, and so on. So if I think this is the big thing that you're missing right now, and if this appeals to you, and I think with women's fiction, it's a big piece of the puzzle. It's also a big piece of the puzzle for memoir. I think it can be worth it for this reason alone if you want to try and grow your footprint and then make use of it for your entire career. Like you might do it for one or two books and see how it goes, and then decide I've squeezed the lemon for all of its juice, and now I'm going to move on. But it's pretty clear to me from looking at your numbers, because I got your Ingram numbers.
Yeah.
I'm so happy you broke this out.
Yeah.
Everyone, please keep spreadsheets like Dee. It's just marvelous. You're not reaching the bookstore or library market, and I
At
can
all.
tell. Yeah, I can tell from your
Yeah.
Ingram royalties. You can barely
Yeah.
cover a nice coffee.
Hmm.
But this is common. Like it's not like you failed. This is what happens. And for those who don't know what Ingram is, if you're trying to distribute outside of Amazon, then you typically use Ingram Spark. That's Ingram distribution, very standard distribution, where bookstores and libraries and other people, if they want to sell your book, that's who they will usually order from. But it is so hard to get them to order because they don't know you and you're self-published, right? So this is where I'm going to quote the former CEO of Penguin Random House. I love this quote. She started a new publishing company a couple years ago. And when she talked about why, She said, well, publishers work harder than ever to impact sales. We've invested and innovated, but despite these efforts, we've lost the power to uniquely influence the consumer. In the old market, degrees came down to what the publisher did or didn't do. In the new market, it's about the author. So she's essentially saying, if you want to reach readers, authors, it's kind of on you.
Yeah.
So this is what I mean about the difference between market reach and reader reach. I do think a publisher is going to reach some markets that are so far don't know you exist, but will they directly reach readers? Who the hell knows? And that brings me to Bloom Books, which is Source Books. This is the publisher that does Frida McFadden. They do E.L. James. When I talked with their team some time ago, they said when they partner with self-published authors like Frida McFadden, they ask, do we add value? Are authors struggling in one area? What is it they actually want? When we combined forces, we amplified. And I think that's really a key takeaway message for so many people thinking about this. And if they want to work with a traditional publisher, it's not that you're going to hand over the keys to the car and let them do all the driving. It's a collaboration, and you have to be prepared to take advantage and build on the opportunity yourself. And here I just want to mention one particular author, Scott Rankin, who I'm going to be publishing an interview with him pretty soon. I just really admire him. He's in the children's market and YA market. And when he was with his first publisher, which was a Big Five, they didn't really do much to support him. And, he ended up doing a lot of legwork to try and move the needle. And he primarily focused on class visits because he's a children's author, and also he had experience in education. So it was a very easy path for him to take to start to build his readership. But the publisher didn't really do a lot to contribute to that. And in fact, you might say they did things that subverted it. But when he switched publishers, and he did have an agent who helped him maneuver through all this, when they saw what he was doing on his own, they were like, wow, you can do that on your own? We are going to support you. So as soon as you do things that indicate the potential, they're going to jump on it. So I think in the best case scenario, it's both sides working towards a common goal. So if I were asked to guide a women's fiction author without knowing anything about them, I think traditional publishing makes the most sense if you're writing about one book per year, if you follow what I just said. Now, if you're an indie author who wants to pursue an agent, I would query with a new project. If that new project is in the same category as the self-published work, highlight your success in the query's bio, mention the reader engagement. If you need to, I don't think this applies to UD, if you need to tidy up your online presence, make sure your work looks great. But other than that, it's the same process as a debut author. And I wanted to offer here at the end just a little example of what it looks like if you were when you're pitching an agent. And, if you were pitching your memoir, I think you could still include this information. You might not go into as much granular detail, but you can show that you are an active participant and getting your book out there and reaching readers. So for those who are watching and you're trying to hurriedly copy that down, don't worry, it's going to be on the recording, and you can steal that if it's useful to you. Now, if you want to continue self-publishing, especially in the women's fiction space, but I think it applies to memoir too, how can we help grow your readership without you having that inside market access that publishers have? I do think it's possible. It just takes the hard work, So I don't know. We didn't talk about whether you are part of any organizations. I know you're part of some, but there's the Women's Fiction Writers Association and Tall Poppies that fit really well with what you're writing. And I think there's a lot of potential collaborations there with other authors to, where you could join forces. I think your books would do wonderfully, women's fiction or memoir, with book clubs, with library marketing campaigns. I would look at Amy Stewart as a model to follow there, because she really kind of cracked the code on how to do book club marketing. I think she has something with Authors Guild that teaches that.
Yeah, cool.
Look at regionally, locally, you're in Albuquerque. is there some sort of store, and I don't necessarily mean bookstore, but any store that would help attract, that already attracts your key readership? Can you partner on something, kind of think outside the box? Go to places that don't care about whether you're traditionally published or not. Like the example that gets used a lot in the indie market, I think, at conferences is, um, you know, Black authors will particularly go to like barbershops or hair salons, and they'll get their books featured in the places that the community is always going into and through and meeting up at. So think about those places for your book. And then finally, especially since you've got retirement coming up soon, that might open up your schedule to do some platform building or literary citizenship activities that would kind of make you a community leader in the space. That might not appeal to you, but I'm thinking like doing your own reading club that's virtual, or having a podcast where you're in conversation with other authors, you're so well spoken, anything that appeals to you that would help raise up your profile among comparable authors is what I would suggest. But it's all, obviously, this is all as time permits. None of this is must. It's about trying to grow without needing a publisher to do it for you. All right, I was racing a little bit there at the end because I wanted to make sure that we got the key points in within the 1 hour mark. But I would like to stay on for a little bit to do some Q&A, first allowing Dee to ask some questions. So what are you thinking at the moment, Dee? What's your mindset?
Well, I think you've given me a lot more information than the answer to my question. So yeah, that's in a good way. There were a lot of things that I hadn't thought about. Like I'd never thought about some kind of partnership where that you may maintain some control of digital rights or things like that. Like I didn't even
Yeah.
know those things existed. So I think that's an interesting, ongoing question, an
Yeah.
ongoing thing. And I like the idea. There's actually one particular small press that's published a essay for me. It's Bellevue,
Hmm.
a literary magazine, and so that's something that I might query, something like that that's got that medical connection and that
Right.
medical thing for the
Yes.
memoir. But I don't. I think you've talked me out of probably querying for it.
Okay.
Um, but I don't know. I don't know that I know what I'm going to do with it.
Okay.
So I had some other ideas and some other thoughts about things to do with it. So we'll maybe test those theories.
Now, are you done with the memoir, or are you still working on it?
No, I'm still working on it. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, I know this, like I've thrown a lot at you, and
Mhm.
I would imagine, you're gonna marinate in all of this.
I'm gonna have to look through it all and kind of, yeah, like because the part, I'm here listening to it, but now I have to study it. So
Yeah. Yeah. Um, so I'm looking at the Q&A box here, and I'm looking at most upvoted. So for those of you still with us, if you want to upvote the questions you want to hear answered live, I'll pay more attention to those. But I see Elisa is asking if we'll address the overlay of demographics and genre on the likelihood of landing an agent. I hear traditionally published authors glibly telling people just keep trying when the chances are so small, especially for later blooming authors. Yeah, I mean, I would never advocate that you just keep beating your head against the wall with something that's not working. But I would say that there are so many reasons things aren't working, and it's hard to give advice in the abstract. Sometimes, more often than not, people aren't putting the blame squarely where it belongs, which is not on who they are or how old they are, but the qualities of the work itself. So I find agents and publishers react most to the qualities of the work. Is this going to be easy to sell? Is it in a genre or category that's growing right now? Who do I know that will buy this? So I don't think people are getting excluded for being too old, or, I don't know, not being the right sort of person, like a savvy New York literati type. I think it's just you've written a book that doesn't fit what they think sells in the market. So that just, which means either you should consider self-publishing, maybe you set it aside and consider, is there something else that I can do that's more favorable in today's market? Or you can look at smaller presses that don't care as much about those trends. Now, Dee, you said you don't write to market. That's not how you operate.
I just can't. It's
Yeah.
not possible.
Yeah. The authors who are able to tap into the zeitgeist, they definitely do have an advantage. There's no debate about that. Jill is wondering what's a reasonable budget for a publicist for a debut novel? Now, Dee, you didn't hire a
Mm.
publicist. Did you actually look into that at all?
No, I feel like, and I wanted to step back to like the hybrid thing just a little bit because I had
Sure.
read, it was you who talked me out of it in an article, and I think that it's kind of similar with the publicist. Is if I'm going to spend that kind of money, I want to, if it's going to get messed up, I want to mess it up.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because if you're doing it yourself, I think you forget that you're learning, right? And so I knew the whole time that I was advertising, I was like, okay, this is not working, but I'm learning what works.
Yeah.
And so if I give that off to somebody else, so the same thing with hybrid publishing, if I pay somebody to do all that, I'm not learning how to do that myself and make this a viable thing that I go forward with.
Yeah.
So I personally just don't think that any publicist that I have heard anything about charges it's just not it's just so outrageous that it's you're just never going to get it back.
Yeah.
So you're better off learning one thing and learning it well and running with that than you are trying to find somebody who's going to magically find that audience. And just as an aside, anybody who emails you cold is not legit. That's it. Period.
Yes.
Right there.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you for saying so.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All those book club approaches are not real book clubs you want to be a part of
No.
as well. Um, Now, Jill, I rubber stamp everything Dee just said, and I just want to add, if you were to hire a publicist for like a traditional campaign, you're probably looking at like 5,000 a month retainer, 3 months required. I'd say somewhere around 15 to 20,000 is the ballpark that you often hear. But you can, you're not going to make that money back through sales 99% of the time. I would say think about where do you really need help? Like what's the area of need where you need coaching or you need a lift? Can you hire someone just for that task? And if people are wondering who can you trust, what people might I hire, I do have a resource list I'm happy to share with you. Just email me at courses. I'm going to put this into the chat. Email me at courses@janefriedman.com and I can share that list with you of places to start. Bruce is wondering, how do you know your sales numbers? Does Amazon provide that data to you?
Yes. Yeah, and if you care to, you can look it on a minute by minute basis, which you do at the beginning.
Yeah.
So yeah, you get everywhere that you put your book up, you get sales numbers. So and I keep, as you saw, I keep a spreadsheet of where those sales are coming from, and then you can get. I think one of the great advantages of being an indie is that you can get granular to
Mhm.
this ad sold this many books. So
Yes.
I'm not just putting up an ad and saying like, oh, I hope that works. I can actually track with a tracking link. This ad sold this many books.
Yeah. Yeah. Idel is asking, what is upmarket fiction and how would you characterize a coming of age novel geared for adults? So, upmarket fiction is a really squishy term. And I'm going to actually share something in the chat that points to a definition that was written by a literary agent. It is very much an industry term. You're not going to find readers going into the bookstore saying, "What's your latest upmarket novel?" It's not a thing out in the public. But agents and publishers talk about it as the sort of work that combines the best of commercial fiction, like a page-turning quality, and literary fiction, which is, something you can sink your teeth into and discuss with a book club because it challenges ideas or expectations we have. And they usually really tap into something that concerns people today. Like there's a kind of I'm not going to say a newsy quality to it, but there's some issue that it confronts that people are grappling with in their everyday lives. A coming of age novel geared for adults may or may not be an upmarket fiction novel. It just depends if it has those qualities that I suggested. I want to say that there's no coming of age shelf either in the bookstore or library. So ideally, you'll need to think more about like your comps. Or is it a coming of age mystery? Is it coming of age literary? Like we need something more there to go on to figure out who the readership is. Jean is wondering what are the pros and cons of letting existing traditional publishing contracts expire and taking back your rights. Generally, I think this is a boon to authors for so many reasons, especially if you have a name that has become a brand, like readers expect certain types of work from you, if you're still actively publishing, if you're getting rights back to a series and you still want to continue the series. I think there are really no cons unless you really grieve not having a traditional publisher any longer. But usually if they're letting the contract expire, it means they're no longer supporting the work. And there might be something more that you can do with it. I think I'm just scrolling through the rest of the questions here and see if there's anything we might want to end on. Okay, here's an interesting one this is an issue that you touched on, Dee, and people might take heart in hearing from you speak about it a little bit more. Joan says, how have others overcome the difficult to erase message that traditional publishing is a validation of my worth as a writer?
Oh gosh. I think we definitely struggle with that, I think, all the time, because that's partially why I reached out to you,
Hmm.
was because of that nagging sense that somehow I've missed something that I haven't done. On the one hand, I know my books are good. And I have, good interactions with my readers, and I feel really good about that. On the other hand, there's this sense that club didn't
Hmm.
let me in,
Yes.
and so I think that it's definitely something that we struggle with. And I don't know that I think one of the big myths, right? I think, and this was, I think, the biggest thing that it gave me comfort, because I didn't know that House on Fire was actually that successful. Like I didn't know that my numbers were unusual until I read a blog about the Penguin Random House
Yes.
taking over Simon Schuster. And if you don't know, that's Random House was trying to buy Simon and Schuster, and they thought it was going to be a monopoly. And so all these people ended up testifying before Congress. So this is public record where they actually started sharing real numbers and real sales. And I'm not sure, and you'll probably know the exact statistics, but it's something ridiculous, like 90% of traditionally published books sell less than 2,000
That's
copies.
correct. Yes.
And when I saw that, I was like, oh, well, I've sold more than that. So that was the first moment that I was like, oh, wait a minute, wait a minute, this is actually better than traditional books.
Yeah.
And so I think one of the ways that you can cure that, I say I cure it even though I haven't, is that knowing the facts, knowing the actual information.
Yeah.
So don't go by other people thinking that just because a book is in the bookstore that means it's selling. It doesn't. That
Yeah.
doesn't mean anything. So just be careful you're not doing that. And also, why are you writing? Like, what are you writing for? The reason that I went indie was ultimately I couldn't get an agent, but I believed in that book. Like I wanted readers to read that book, because as a writer, I've already written two books that didn't get published, that I'd never tried to publish. I did that, before. And I realized, like, this is the closing of the process, right? I write the book, I make it good enough and worthy enough for a reader to read, and then I find that reader. And if I don't do that, and I keep just doing this, putting stuff in the drawer and not getting it out there, I haven't really found that connection. So sales is not everything, and money is not everything. And I'm not in this clearly for money. Um, so I think be careful that you're not looking for something that you don't really need. I can't tell you, like, when someone reaches out to me about my book and loves it, I mean, that's it. I don't care about anything else. Once they're like, oh, I loved your book, it was fantastic. That's absolutely the best thing ever.
Yeah.
So.
I just want to add for people who do get traditionally published, and I bet people in the chat will agree with this, that doesn't take away the status anxiety because the bar just moves, right? So now you have the traditional publisher and your legitimate in quotes, but you didn't get that award, or you didn't get the advance that someone else got, or you didn't get the support you think you deserve. Whatever it happens to be, like the bar moves. So I think we all, and this includes me, we're all, having to give ourselves positive messages about as like exactly what you described. You get the messages from the readers. You look at the evidence that what you're doing is working and is in fact quality, and it doesn't really matter that you didn't have this one component as part of it.
Mhm.
All right. So we're now a quarter past the hour. I want to be respectful of everyone's time here. Thank you so much for joining us, folks. I'm so glad that you came today. And thank you to Dee for being so open and honest with not just the finances, but the whole emotional journey that you've been on through this. And I can't wait to see what you do next. It's going to be exciting, I know.
Thank you. Thanks. And thank you. This was very, very insightful and very different than what I expected.
Oh, well, I hope that's a good thing.
Yeah. Yes. In a good way. Yes.
Okay. Thanks, everyone. And I hope to see you again soon. Bye bye.